universe is logical and orderly, does that mean that it was designed by a divine mind? Or are we just projecting human concepts onto the cosmos here? Welcome back to Answers from Genesis. I'm here again with Alan Bondar, and today we're tackling two related arguments in classical apologetics. The transcendental argument, which claims that the laws of logic come from God, and the teleological argument, which asserts that the complexity of the universe proves a designer. Now, we touched on those a little bit in the last episode, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into these. Before we do, Alan has written a book called
How to Kill God the Easy Way. The end. Less than 30 seconds. Right there, Jen. Look at that.
How to Kill God the Easy Way. And if you've been paying attention to us, you've heard it on every episode that we've done, so we're not going to do the long version anymore. But the link to buy the book is down in the description down here, and this is separate from the book and gives there you'll want both. They complement one another.
Well, okay. We might do the long version again. No promises, but today.
All right. So before we get started on the transcendental and teleological arguments, which some people are probably saying, what the hell is that? Before we get started, we wanted to address one more part from what we talked about last time in cosmological arguments, and that is Craig's Kalam argument. What in the world is that, Alan?
Yes, so William Lane Craig came up with an argument called the Kalam argument based on a philosopher's views that the idea behind the Kalam argument is it moves from Aquinas's argument about the existence of the universe forever and Craig, of course, recognizes that, there's no reason that you would need a God if you have an eternal universe. And so in order to have a God that exists, that created the universe, you have to have the argument that says that there is no such thing as an infinite or as a quantitative infinite. Quantitative infinite. Nothing can exist eternally. Nothing has the ability on its own to exist infinitely. And that's the essence of the Kalam argument. There's no such thing, or I used quantitative, and I'm mixing up the terms, but it's actually, there's no such thing as an absolute infinite. So nothing can absolutely exist infinitely. And that's the Kalam argument. And so you're left with saying, oh, well, then how in the world did this universe come into being? Because nothing can exist absolutely infinitely. And Craig says, oh, well, that's easy. The answer is God. And the rest of us scratch our heads and we say, but isn't that an absolute infinite?
Exactly.
And to which he says, no, because the difference between God and everything else is God is not existing infinitely quantitatively. He's existing infinitely qualitatively. Right, exactly. It's ridiculous. It's silly, but the idea is, well, God's qualitative attributes are omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, the ones you talked about in the last episode. And so those are what define God qualitatively. And so he exists in that fashion. It isn't about quantitative. It isn't about how long he lived. That doesn't matter. It's about his qualities that nobody else shares. And there must be a being that has these qualitative attributes in order to have brought about a infinite or a universe. So something qualitative had to be existing infinitely.
Like
somehow that's not considered an absolute infinite. I don't get that part, but anyway, go ahead.
But energy answers his whole argument.
Yes, it does.
I mean, it just does. So okay, that one.
Yeah, no, I mean I get frustrated by this argument. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I think it's a stretch. I think he absolutely is being driven by his presupposition that God exists and had to force him and his crew of people that follow his argument said, "Oh crap, what are we going to do now? We said there's no such thing as an absolute infinite. Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll define God as an infinite based on qualitative attributes." And it doesn't make any sense because even those have quantitative aspects to them, like foreknowledge, for example, or omniscience. That's not just qualitative, that's quantitative. You have to know how many things in the future are going to happen. I mean, that's an infinite quantitative aspect. So to say that these are just qualitative attributes doesn't make sense because they have quantitative aspects to them too. So anyway, the whole argument doesn't work. It's just an attempt to force God as the only possible infinite, even though you just argued there's no such thing as an absolute infinite. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It doesn't work. You can read more about it in the book. You can see my arguments. I lay it out a little bit more eloquently, obviously, but yeah, it's just I don't know. It's a very frustrating argument. I don't get it.
This reminds me a little bit of the Christians, and I have one particular Christian friend who often likes to say that all of the rules that we have, no matter what they are for, but in this particular conversation, the origin of the universe, all of the rules that we have do not apply to God. So God is like outside of these rules. So when I bring up, all the murders that God has committed in the story, I just call it a story because that's all it is, right? So all of the that he's the greatest mass murderer who ever lived in the story, right? That it doesn't apply to God because he's outside of these rules. The rules don't apply to him. And so that is kind of what I see happening here is that um, William Lake Craig is actually trying to make a case for the rules don't apply to God, and God has his own set of non-rules, basically, that make him greater than all of the rules of the laws of the universe or anything that we have in science that we know. And the only way that we can answer that is by saying, oh, those don't apply to God.
Yep. No, I agree. And really, the argument comes down to as it's the exact same thing as saying, well, spider webs exist, therefore Spider-Man must be the cause
Exactly. Exactly.
because
All right.
he's got qualitative aspects to him. I don't know. I don't get it, Jen. I'm frustrated by it. It's anyway, yeah, we just need to move on because I'm gonna start saying some mean things if I don't move on because it's asinine and it's just the God of the gaps on steroids is what it is.
All right, let's go to transcendental and teleological arguments. And let's just start this again. The transcendental argument is it just claims that the laws of logic come from God. And that sounds good, right?
I
Laws of
mean,
logic come from God. I mean, they have to come from somewhere. And then the teleological argument is the is intelligent design, basically, right? So everything is so complex. How could anything have made the eyeball unless it was God? Somebody had to design that eyeball. It just couldn't have happened, right?
right.
So um, these are another source of evidence for Christians that prove that there is a divine creator. So why do you think that Christians kind of go with this argument?
Well, which argument are you talking about? Because they have some slight differences.
We should
Let's
probably take them one at a time, right? Let's
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 start
start
with
with transcendental. All right.
yeah.
The laws
Yeah.
of logic come from God. Why do you think that Christians take that view?
Well, one of the problems is that people don't differentiate between prescriptive laws and descriptive laws.
Hmm.
And that's part of the problem is they lump them together as if they're the same. So a prescriptive law is something like do not murder, or do not steal, or do not trespass, do not and maybe even something more specific, do not touch my food in the fridge, right? Prescriptive laws. Descriptive laws are terms that we give to natural laws that take place in the universe, such as gravity or energy. And we call them gravity and energy, but they are laws that already exist. We're just describing something that's already inherent in the universe. So they're entirely different. In order for a prescriptive law to be upheld, you need someone or a group of people that have prescribed the law and stated the law that can then therefore uphold that law. A descriptive law, you don't need that because that law is going to exist whether we've described it or not. We're just giving it a term, but it's already inherent. So when you don't separate those ideas and you convolute prescriptive and descriptive, it's easy to think that descriptive laws are bound by the same concept as a prescriptive law. And therefore, it's easy to say, oh, see, energy needs God to uphold it because God said there's such a thing as energy. Well, no, God didn't say there's such a thing. You don't need a term for energy. It just is what it is. We just chose to give it a description. We could have called it anything. It wouldn't have mattered. We called it energy. So you don't need a God to uphold a descriptive law. You do need a God to uphold a prescriptive law that God has prescribed or stated to be true. Don't touch my food in the fridge. Well, that's just a subjective law. That's just something that I've said, hey, don't do it. But there's nothing in the universe that says, hey, there's food in the fridge. I shouldn't eat it. There's nothing that would tell you that other than a note on the bag that said, this is my food. So there's a major difference
Mold.
between what's that?
Or it's covered in mold.
Or it's covered in mold. That would also be a reason not to touch it, which would fall under a descriptive law. Exactly. Things get moldy, and once it gets moldy, you're going to say, no, I'm good. But yeah, so I mean, so the transcendental argument only is a problem when you confuse prescriptive and descriptive laws. The universe itself gives us the laws that we have described. There is nothing at all whatsoever that requires a God to give us energy and gravity. We've yet to discover why that would be the case. It is just discoverable in our universe. We don't need some God to give it to us.
Okay. Um, I want to talk about descriptive and prescriptive a little bit more.
Sure.
Depending on where you come from as a Christian, you might have some different ideas on what this is. And I know that when I was a Christian, my understanding was similar but different. Okay. Um, so the prescriptive laws were the Ten Commandments. They're the ones that are prescribed, right? The
Right.
descriptive ones were the laws. This is what I was taught. They were the laws of God that were told to us in story form, whether it was the story of Moses or Daniel or David, David's son died because he committed adultery and, all that kind of stuff. Or the parables or, those kind of stories. So the stories were, in some Christian circles, not in all, the stories were just as much as of a law for Christians as the Ten Commandments were for people who think that they were under the Ten Commandments. So there is a huge confusion, and actually, there is nothing in the Bible that would actually say that to begin with. So the first step is realizing that the descriptive laws in the Bible, what you may have been told is a descriptive law. Just because it's a story does not necessarily mean if any person who commits adultery, their firstborn or their next born son is going to die to atone for that adultery relationship. We can see that does not play out across all of history, right? So that is not a law. That is not a descriptive law, but it is
Right.
taught in many Christian circles as being a descriptive law. And so that's where many Christians come up with all of their rules and their sins and their lists of do's and don'ts and all that kind of stuff from all these various stories. So that's one of the first things that needs to happen is realizing that is not actually a law. It's just a story. It's a story, and different things happen to different people, even if they do the same kinds of things. The outcome will be
Right.
different, right?
Right.
So it does not
And
make it a law. The story does not make it a law.
correct. Well, it doesn't make it a descriptive. Correct. And one of the problems is Christians have convoluted them so much that they say if it's a law, any law, it comes from God,
Hmm.
and that's just not true. there are many prescriptive laws that come from God. Not that I believe in God, but your belief in God, because you read the Bible, and so you see these prescriptive laws, like as some of the examples you just gave. They're just given by some ancient book, and you believe it's God, and so you call it a law, and so it's a definitive thing in your mind. Well, the difference is when it comes to these descriptive laws, we have been able to demonstrate them empirically. Like through evidence, we know gravity exists. In fact, you, me, and 600 other people can all go to the Empire State Building, and every one of us can drop a weight from that building. And you know what's going to happen with all 600 of us? It's going to fall the exact same way. None of us are going to have a weight that suddenly floats to the sky. It's just not going to happen. Miracles don't happen. And I can promise you, all of us are going to experience the exact same thing. That's how you prove things empirically. You
That's right.
test it, you get evidence together, and you say, holy shit, this is something that exists in our universe. It's called evidence. So, because we have empirically proven gravity, empirically proven energy, these are things that exist. Even the universe, we can look around us, empirically have proven, hey, there's a universe. We know these things. God is yet to be proven empirically. So here's the problem is when all these empirical proofs demonstrate a law, you can't just fill the gap and then say, oh, God must have come up with that law. No, we know the law exists because of empirical evidence. We have no empirical evidence to prove that God exists. So why would you throw God in the gap and do another middleman thing here to try to make him some reason behind it? No, these laws exist. We've given them a name. Simple as that. These other laws, like adultery, visits, the children or whatever, that's prescriptive. That you're right. That you cannot prove that over and over again. Prayer, you can pray all you want. You're going to get different results. It's a 50-50 chance that what you
Yeah.
pray for is going to work. These are prescriptive laws. They come from some being. And even in our culture, we have prescriptive laws, and that's fine. That's the way life works. But you cannot confuse the two. They are entirely different. And descriptive laws do not prove God. In fact, prescriptive laws do not prove God. It just proves that you believe that there's a law in your Bible that tells you how to live. That's all that proves.
Right. Right. Okay, so this goes back to having to name everything that I don't understand. I'm going to name it God.
Right.
Instead of
Yeah.
saying, I don't understand how this works. I don't understand how gravity works. I don't understand how energy works. I don't understand how consciousness works. I'm just going to name it God.
Yep.
And it is funny because even some of the scientific terms that we've chosen, Christians are afraid to, they're literally afraid of them. Many, many, many Christians, not all, but many Christians are actually afraid of the terms. They're afraid of looking at them. They're afraid of just seeing anything about them.
Yeah.
So,
Well, like the Big Bang or um what's that, what's the term that's evading my mind right now, the singularity. Like I've told you before, when I was a Christian, oh, that stuff, I don't need to pay attention, right? And now that I'm on this side and I'm actually trying to learn what science has to tell us about our beginnings, I'm just like, holy crap, this stuff makes sense. Because I actually took the time to understand it, and it's not saying the stuff that I was told that it taught. Like it's nothing like that. It makes so much more sense than we think. Like nobody that I can see is arguing that all of us came from nothing. Like that's not at all the argument of the Big Bang. It's such a confusing term, and somehow Christians just listen to the term and they say, "Oh, look at a stupid scientist saying we came from nothing." That's not what it says.
right,
That's
exactly.
not the Big Bang at all. Go look up what the Big Bang's about. Like for the first time in my life, I actually feel intelligent a little bit. It's like mind blowing.
I was watching a video about the Big Bang at lunch today, and because it is fun to learn all of these kinds of things, and I feel like I still have a ton to learn, that I didn't do while I was Christian in these areas.
Yeah,
And the subject was very, very interesting, and I think it applies here, where he was talking about, and I won't say the name because people will go nuts. But anyway, he was talking about the Big Bang Theory in specifically, and how there was a clickbait article that said, "Does the Webb telescope now disprove the Big Bang Theory?" And so he was addressing that, right? And what he said was that scientists have done these experiments on the origins of the universe, basically, right? And they do the experiment over here in New York. They do one in California. They do one in London. They do one in China. They do one in Russia. They do one, all these different experiments all over the world. And what usually happens is the first time a scientist of any kind does an experiment that shows something new, then there are going to be other scientists, just like on Facebook or X or whatever, wherever you are having your debates about whatever you're having, scientists do exactly the same thing. They just do it with experiments. And they're like, "Ooh, I don't like that guy. I'm going to prove him wrong." So they go in, they do their experiment to prove the first guy wrong. And it comes up that the first guy was right. Well, then by if they're ethical scientists, then they are obligated to actually um, uh, publish that study, right? And so then the next guy's like, "Oh, I don't like both those guys. I'm going to prove them wrong." And this happens and happens and happens in the scientific universe until they get to literally hundreds of people who have done the same type of experiment, but their experiment is literally trying to prove the other guy wrong. So in doing so, they all end up with the same answer. So they've gotten a certain amount of that within the Big Bang Theory. They've got a certain amount of, they've done so many different experiments that they know all of these different things. And I can't list them because I'm not good enough at doing that yet. But anyway, this. And then they'll find something new, like with the James Webb Hubble telescope. Did I say that right? And the telescope will find something new, and somebody will come along and say, "Oh, it disproves all the rest of that stuff." He said, "No, it doesn't. What it does is you still have all of this stuff. It's all proven. This just gives us something new to look at now. Do we add it on? Does it change this factor, or is it something new that now is added on to the whole concept?" It's like it's not even really a theory anymore. We have so much evidence for it. It's been proven over and 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 over again hundreds of times. And so for Christians to refuse to look at that and then want to have these conversations, I think that's where we have a real serious problem, because if you want to have the conversation about this, you'll find that most scientists say we're still learning, right? But they'll say, "This is what I know, this is what I think, and this is what I'm looking at." But the Christian will come along and they will say, "Well, thousands of scientists are wrong, and I'm not even going to look at it." And it's not a fair conversation. You can't even have a conversation on those two different levels like that.
Well, Jen, the problem you're having is you don't need to look at it. God is the answer. It.
And
All
that
these other things, the reason you're all so confused is because you're just not having faith in God. He is the solution to all of this.
that is very true.
It's
I hear it
silly
every
people
single
trying to
day.
study science and think you can find your answers of science. You'll never, because you're always changing. You can't possibly know. It's God, period. That's it. But that was me. I was there.
Yep,
I mean, I can hardly mock it because it's not. Look, and I've said this before many times in our episodes, and I'm going to say it again right now. Christians aren't stupid; they're brainwashed. There is a huge difference.
yeah.
You just don't have the ability to acknowledge that God isn't the answer. You can only have Him as your answer when you're brainwashed. Like that's just you're like a horse with blinders on. And I wish that I could just take them off and help you see that there's so much out here to discover. God is not even remotely in the ballpark of truth.
All right, let's do the teleological argument. So that's like intelligent design, right?
Yeah.
So complexity implies design. So we've got this complex I, therefore God. That's my only answer, right? So what do you have to say about that?
Well, look, number one, so just at the outset, I'm just going to say the teleological argument is absolutely ridiculous. Like there are so many flaws in our world, like to say that design demands some designer is like really weird because when I look at the eye, I wonder why I have freaking like um what do you call astigmatism.
Hmm.
The other eye, I have constant infections, and I have like styes and pink eye. And I have, and then there's people who are blind, and there's people who are legally blind, and you're looking at this, and you're like, if there is a designer, why couldn't he design all eyes correctly? Was he that bad at it? If especially if he's God, how could he screw it up so bad? Oh, well, that's sin, Alan. Okay, great. But now you are bringing in a whole nother presupposition that you still have to prove that sin exists. And so like you don't get to just say sin exists, therefore, buh. No, you don't get to just say that. You still have to prove your first premise that sin exists before you can start saying that sin is the reason why we have bad eyes. Because I still would like to say, if why does that mean that God couldn't make eyes? Well, because sin caused a problem in the human race. Because, okay, well, great. And then you have these offshoots of Christianity called full preterism, and they're going to argue that physical bodies weren't affected by sin in any way, shape, or form because it was all spiritual.
That's
So,
true.
then you're going to have Christians arguing with each other saying, no, 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 the eye isn't a disaster because of sin. Okay, well then that brings us back to why is God the problem? Where did he screw up? Like so there's just so many issues with this argument. It just doesn't actually give the answer. In fact, evolution makes way more sense as to why we have so many flaws in the system because there's no intelligent designer behind it making it work. It's just evolution, and we're adapting and we're doing the best we can as we adapt. And everybody does not evolve perfectly because that's what evolution is. It's a process. So that's my first thing. There's nothing about the argument that says God must exist. There's nothing about this that says some designer must be here. So that in itself is a serious problem. Um, but then there's the whole other side. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, you're right. There has to be an intelligent designer, right? This is where I am with Don Presser right now in our debates, and he's been silent for 3 days ever since I brought this up.
He's
Fine.
snowed in.
What's that?
He's snowed in.
Oh yeah, he snowed in. Well, yeah, sure, he's snowed in. I also know he had another, like he had some kind of lecture thing to do. So I haven't said anything. I backed off, and that's fine. I'm going to give him some time, but I really want to see what he does with this because it's very. I've never seen anybody be able to pull it off, but he seems to think he can. He's going to use the empirical argument of the designer to prove that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, exists. And I'm like, all right, great. I'm not going to fight it. Designer is necessary. Let's roll with that. You've proved it to me. Let's pretend like Yahweh, like there is a designer that has to exist. Prove to me that Yahweh is that designer. Take me beyond the 50-yard line. Take me to the 100-yard line. Take me 100% and show me that your argument for an intelligent designer has to be Yahweh. Nobody can do this because there's no way you can prove the God of the Bible from that. All you can prove is that there's something out there that designed us.
Well,
Even
that
if it grants you
internal
the
evidence will be all that he has.
what's that?
Internal evidence will be all that he has.
Well, yeah, of course, but then you got to prove the Bible's true.
Right. Well, and then, so, I have a friend who has gone down this route already, and shown all the internal evidence as if I somehow missed that part of the Bible when I wrote a commentary on the whole Bible. But anyway, it is so funny when people think I've missed a part of the Bible. But so he shows all this internal evidence, and I ask, prove that any of this is true, prove that anyone wrote this, that they said that, oh well, when they put the canon together, then they knew at that time that all these things were true, otherwise they would not have put this whole canon together. And so it is really funny to see the hoops that people will jump through. It's like, okay, would that hold up in a court of law? We're going to go back to that over and over again as we talk about these types of evidence, right? Would that hold up in a court of law? Well, this person put 66 books into an encyclopedia, let's just say. Therefore, the whole encyclopedia is true because this person was the king, and that makes it true. I mean, that's literally what they have, right? That's all they're gonna. That's all he's gonna be able to come up with. He can't come up with anything else.
Yeah, but look, here's the problem. If your argument is going to be, well, let's go to the Bible then, and I'll prove the resurrection, and the resurrection will prove God. I'm like, okay, well, why didn't you start with that? Like, how does a teleological argument help you in any way, shape, or form in your approach? If you're just going to take me to the Bible and require me to have faith, why did you waste my time trying to prove an intelligent designer? I granted that to you, and you don't have anywhere else to go with it. I think you didn't think I'd grant it to you, but the fact is, I know you can't prove Yahweh with that argument, so I'm willing to grant it. And what you're going to end up doing is going from there and saying, oh, well, since I can't go anywhere with that, you just have to have faith. Well, then why didn't you start with that? Why do you waste my time with these empirical arguments if you're just going to go back to faith? Well, you just got to believe the resurrection happened. Okay, well, I don't. So can you prove that it happened? Well, no, you have to have faith. Everything comes down to faith. Like you can't prove empirically that God exists. And so the intelligent design argument falls short a lot because there are 1,000 possibilities of intelligent designers between here and Yahweh, even if that argument is true. You
And
cannot
you're
say
not even going to
that
find it in the
Yahweh is the
Bible.
only option. What's that?
I said, and you're not going to find that in the Bible because I'm sitting here wondering why he thinks it's Yahweh when the Bible says Elohim.
Well, it could be Elohim. Hell, I'd settle for that. Prove that it's Elohim. I'd settle to prove any particular God from the intelligent design. Just prove to me that it's one particular God, 100%, just using the empirical argument. Because if you're going to start there, you got to finish there. You can't take me a bit with that and then say, oh, the rest you have to have faith. That's stupid as shit.
Yeah.
That did not help in any way, shape, or form because now you're still requiring the method of faith. And the method of faith, if you're going to use that, then I might as well turn you to Joseph Smith and said, well, he had faith too. Go for it.
All right. So this designer, intelligent design argument, who designed the designer?
Exactly. Big problem. And that's the Kalam problem. It's the exact same problem. Like,
Mhm.
okay, you're going to say that only this one particular God has the qualities. Okay, well, how do you know that? How did you determine that? Who designed this God? Like, how do you know? Oh, well, he just has to. How do you know? Well, you have to have faith. Oh my God. It always comes down to faith.
We have just a little bit of time left. Let's just go over a few examples of what we can actually see with our eyes of evolution happening.
Sure. Are you asking a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. It was giving you an idea of the next subject to talk about.
About what?
Give me a few examples of what we can actually see with our own eyes of evolution happening.
Oh, of evolution happening. Oh man.
Because that's what we're talking about in this whole thing. So I'll give you one way you're thinking about it because we're talking about eyes. So most people around age 40 now have a hard time reading, right? So the eyes start to deteriorate around age 40. Has it always been that way? No. So this has been gradual. Wisdom teeth, we used to use those for eating. It actually didn't have anything to do with wisdom, but we used to actually use those for eating. Now our body has said at age 18 approximately, "Hey, you don't need those anymore. Let's get rid of them." So these are some things that we can actually see with our own eyes that are, if we look, and the timer just went off, but if we look over just the last 100 years, if you look at pictures of people from 100 years ago compared to pictures of people from today, and you see them physically, you can actually see physical changes in the whole human race.
Sure.
It's
Even
pretty. It's
our heads are getting bigger.
our head. It's our body shapes and sizes, the different features on our face. I mean, you can see a lot of physical features happen in just 100 years, and think about all the years before that. But our time is up. So just like with any other addiction, when that timer goes off, hey, Gotta stop that brainwashing, right? So we're gonna pick that time and
Sure.
stop.
So please like, subscribe, tip Jen, share, share this, get people involved because these are just fun discussions. We would love to hear your comments. We don't care if you agree or disagree. We just like to have fun discussions. We want to see what's going on in your life. Tell us what you think. Let's just make this interactive because it's a lot more fun than just Jen and I chatting. We would love to hear your thoughts, and then maybe we can even talk about them in future episodes.
All right, well, until next time, question your faith with answers from Genesis.